Welcome back to the 10,000 Heroes Show. I'm your host, Ankur Shah Delight. This is season 6, and get ready, everybody, because season 6 is where we recognize not only the inevitability of conflict, but we see its transcendent potential. That's right. The only way out is through. Hey everybody, and welcome to this episode on Feed Forward with my friend Shilpa Jain. And Shilpa is describing to us today this technique, Feed Forward, which is an iteration on feedback. And basically it's a way to give better feedback that accomplishes everybody's goals. So she does a great job of going to the technique. It's concise, it's beautiful. So I'm not going to say much about it here, but I will warn you, this episode has 3 different segments. So part 1 is the part about Feed Forward. Part 2 is just some other conversation we got into afterwards. That's a little bit of a teaser for the next episode I might do with Shilpa. But I left it in there because I think it's awesome and it's really provocative questions. And then we end the interview, and then there's this other part, which is the part 3, which is something that I was feeling but didn't have the courage to say when I thought it was the interview, but I recorded it, so I'm putting it anyways as a way of basically personal accountability. So here you go. Okay, so what I want to get into today is I read one of your posts on your Substack this morning, and there's a lot of great stuff in there, and I'm just going to ignore most of it and focus on one word, which you did not explain nor define, and I want you to do that now. And I know it'll take a little context, and I'm ready for that context. And the word was feed forward. And so give me the architecture of how you got to feed forward, because I have no idea. I mean, I guessed what it means, but I have no idea.
Thank you. Thanks for that question. So we often talk about feedback, right? So I've done something and I get feedback for it, what happened, and there's something that comes back. When I add feed forward, it's because when I'm really giving feedback, it's because I'm invested in the relationship and the work and whatever we are doing together in the person. And I want it to feed forward. I want it to go forward because we can't go back technically. Like whatever has happened, that action, that behavior, whatever, those words, whatever I'd done or said, that's already in the past. I can learn from it though. And the reason I'm going to need to learn from it is so that I can feed forward, so I can go forward into what I can do with it and hopefully modify, shift, change in ways that feel more aligned, collaborative, supportive to the context and the person who I'm working with or living with or being with in whatever way. So that's why it's feed forward. I think a lot of times what I see is people get stuck and like what happened, and our inner critics can sort of play that out over and over again. But I should have said, I should have, and the moment's gone. There's nothing to do about the past, except I feel is like examine it to learn from it, receive whatever learnings through conversation, dialogue, and then feed forward, take it forward to make the transformation in the moments to come.
Okay, so you're drawing this distinction between feedback and maybe a specific type of feedback. I'm imagining like this office building, and we walk into this room and there's this kind of like gray thin carpet, and you're like, these are the things that you did not do well in Q1. Here's some feedback. It's really about the material external outcomes. It's not so much about the relationship. It's almost as if the relationship hinged upon or depended upon my progress and whether I integrate this feedback. So that's like kind of one tradition or pillar of our experience in relating to each other, and you're suggesting we move it forward to another pattern.
Yeah, well, what I'm saying is I think that is one form of feedback. There are good things in that form of feedback. It's very direct, it's very explicit, it's usually related to something very concrete and material that we can agree to. I mean, sometimes that feedback is given without discussion, which I don't think is the healthiest form of feedback, right? So my preferred form of feedback is like even if we're in this gray office building or if we're in a sunny park or wherever we are, we've agreed that we're having a conversation. Mm-hmm. So that's the first step.
There's no ambush happening.
Right. There's no ambush. There's no, you're taken by surprise, then your defensive haunches come up. Right. So that's not generally my sense of where good feedback starts. We've agreed that we want to debrief or discuss or reflect or review, whatever it is. We're coming to the conversation prepared for that. I'm offering my observations to you without judgment, without story. Encore, I noticed this happened. I noticed this happened. And then that's followed by some kind of inquiry. What happened for you there? Can you share more about your experience with me? So we're co-creating some mutual understanding. Oh, I heard you use this word and I thought it meant this. Oh, you use this word because you thought it meant this. I see there was a gap there. We're discussing that. We're having some exploration around that. And along with the inquiry, I'm also sharing with you why this conversation is important to me. It's important to me, Encore, because I want to work with you more. I'm sharing the impact it had. It was really hard for me when you used that word because I felt like it didn't respect the work we had done before, whatever the situation is. I'm sharing the impact, and it was challenging for me, and I want to work with you, and I don't want to create stories about who you are, what you mean. I want to understand you more because I'm invested in our collaboration. And so I'm sharing that impact, and you can share and if there's an impact for you as well. And so where there's listening, there's mirroring, reflective, or like that's the kind of feedback I'm talking about. And then at the end of it, we're agreeing together on some next steps to feed forward. And that's where the feed forward comes in, right? Because we can't go back. Whatever happened in that misunderstanding, we missed it. That happened. It's gone. What can we do going forward? Hey, maybe we take a little time and do a little time to define terms, so that we make sure we're on the same page. Or I can share with you these words kind of affect me before we do that presentation together, or whatever we decide. Can we check in about it? We have the next thing coming up. After that, how do you feel about checking in about how we're doing if we've actually been able to transform this piece for ourselves? That's feed forward.
Yeah.
And I think this series of steps, and just laying them out very basically, there's a nice little model called COIN that I learned from my friends at the People piece that basically is this: context, observations, impact, next steps. But I added in inquiry because I think the inquiry is really important. Another I in there in the middle. This form of feedback doesn't happen. And because of that, I don't see it happening very much. I'll say that. I don't see it happening. And I'm usually called into organizations and movements and even couples and other spaces because this hasn't happened, because of conflict avoidance, because of fear of hurting someone's feelings, so in the corporate setting, it happens, but a lot of dysfunction happens around it because there's less inquiry. Yeah. There's less co-creating of the next steps. And there's less impact conversation, to be frank. Also, it's more like, this is why. Why? Because I said so. That's not really an impact conversation, right? Why? Because we want to give this reputation as a company, because it's important to me how we collaborate. Those are whys, right?
Yeah. Connecting to something that will actually inspire the person to be like, oh, I see the effect of my actions.
Right. And that we can also explore that together till we arrive. And I just mostly see people skip all of that. Either it's not given, they don't even start the process. And or if they start, they just stop it. They only do the observations. Here's the feedback. Boom. Yeah. I didn't know if you were ready for it. I didn't check in with you about it after. I didn't set up next steps with you. None of that, right? So, and because of that, I think we have a lot of unprocessed and growing and exponential conflict in our context.
And just to say, I think that that way of giving feedback seems like it was probably appropriate to a time in an economic system where the people were largely interchangeable.
Right, a factory model.
I can fire you and get someone else, and then I don't really need to go in too much to your experience, your interiority, or how you feel may affect the quality of your work. But most of us are kind of out of that.
Yeah, world. Yeah. I mean, workplaces want to be more relational. They want to be more humanistic, humane, right? Kind and humane. They want to make space for different diverse cultures and ways of being. And so we have to evolve that kind of feedback. And as I was saying to you, I think on nonprofits, we have to evolve towards giving more of that kind of feedback of a generative model and less of, not less of, but let me say, like in nonprofits, I often see an extreme of caretaking and over interpreting and over trying to compensate. And so the person never knows the thing that they might be doing that's actually having some kind of, challenging effect on others. Because, I'm trying to make sure they didn't get hurt. I don't want to, they're going through a hard time, so I don't need to tell them that. We do so much over caretaking on the nonprofit or social movement side that the important feedback that people need, they never get it.
Mm-hmm.
So then I think we get to these extreme situations because early on, when we could have said, hey, I noticed your behavior, with this employee was pretty challenging. It looked to me like some kind of sexual harassment was going on. And I saw that, and I want to talk to you about that. We don't talk about those things. And then, and not without accusation, but like, I'm observing something. Let's discuss this. Let's explore this. What's going on there? What's underneath that? What's happening there? How are you understanding it? Let's get into this conversation and talk about the impacts and talk about next steps. And I think so many times those things, I'm giving you one extreme example, but let's just say like you keep, using this word that is really challenging, or you keep excluding certain people in our company. I noticed this happening. We don't talk about it early enough, and so as conflict grows exponentially.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Both of these, this is where I get to say one of my favorite phrases, dialectical synthesis.
I love that's one of your favorite phrases.
Dialectical synthesis. This is where both of these approaches they have something valuable.
It's like a Schoolhouse Rock song around dialectical synthesis.
Dialectical synthesis. Where in this corporate feedback side, they're good at the boundaries, but they're not as good as like the interiorities. And with this other nonprofit side you've experienced, they're really good at seeing the essential humanity, but they're not good at the boundaries. And with both cases, it leads to like increased and more complex conflict.
Yes, exactly.
Which is why we need the dialectical synthesis, which is the feed forward.
Or multilectical, I'll add to that. Multilectical synthesis.
Okay. As I warned you, there's 3 parts. That was the end of part 1. And here comes part 2, which is basically, why is it so hard? Why is this whole feedback or feed forward thing so hard?
I was just reflecting, I wrote another piece, which maybe you'll see at some point. I'm also going to expand on this, but just why is it so hard for people to ask for feedback, give feedback, and receive feedback? If these are the 3 sort of stages, right? And so I've been reflecting, some of my earlier work where we first met was around, radically rethinking education. And I think there are a lot of wounds and traumas, that many of us hold from our experience of education, where feedback was not, we weren't really given much feedback unless we had some extraordinary teachers, which I feel grateful. I did have some that really were working with more of a feedback to feed forward model, trying to help me grow and learn whatever the either context or course was, or because they were like interested in me as a person growing. And most of the time what I got was grading.
Yeah.
And grades, one of my mentors, Munir Fashe, says grades are degrading. They don't actually let me learn anything. I'm just like, here's a number, here's a letter. I'm not really. So there's some trauma or, pain or, unprocessed shame that's around what passes for feedback. And so I think that's part of the hard time asking for it. There's also the inner critic that can get in the way and be like, oh, I'm not perfect. I made a mistake. Mistakes are bad. Mistakes are wrong. Shame, shame, shame. I don't want to ask for it, and when I'm receiving it, I don't want to receive it. And then on the giving side, somebody said to me, when I give feedback, I feel like I'm punishing the person or I'm hurting them in some way. And so there's something also there that I think needs some unraveling or exploration, because I'm like, if I'm not invested in you, right? If I'm giving you, I got to distinguish between a feedback and a criticism or an attack. They're 2 really different things. Because if I'm like, Encore, I believe in you. I want you to grow as a human being. I want you to grow as a podcast facilitator. I want to get you to grow as a conflict coach. Then when I'm giving you feedback, I'm giving it because I'm invested in that. I want to see that happen.
Yeah.
And in you, in your relationship, in our relationship, in your work. But if I'm just like, here you go, Uncle, you didn't do blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
That usually comes out as an attack. And attacks are punishing. They're blaming, right? They're coming from that place. And oftentimes I think that energy comes out because maybe the earlier places of giving the feedback were skipped.
Yeah.
So then when it finally comes out, it comes out like a fire hose.
Yeah.
As opposed
This
to
is all just so deep. When you said that thing about education, I'm just still like, I'm kind of spinning.
Sorry, I went on.
Yeah, no, I need to slow down. I need to go back because, and
Okay,
I was thinking
okay.
about, okay, this is the difficulty of asking for feedback. I was thinking about my own educational experience, of course, which was on the like surface level, it was very positive. You know, I was just a very good student. But then I'm thinking of Marshall Rosenberg, and there's this talk or video that I saw where somebody goes, he's talking about giving gratitude, expressing gratitude, and somebody's like, they're like, "Oh, Marshall, you're just amazing. You're so brilliant. Wow, you're just the most brilliant person I've ever met." And he's like, "So basically, you're just laying judgments on me." And in this case, they happen to be positive judgments, but I receive them as judgments because there's no way for me to connect when you just tell me adjectives about who I am, of how I've actually contributed to your life. And then he has this whole thing, which is beautiful. It's like 3 steps of how to give gratitude, and we could go into that. But what I'm thinking now of like all the many of the educational experiences I had, just getting like these grades, and often it was really positive feedback, but it wasn't really, feedback's not the right word, maybe. It's the really positive judgments, but it wasn't like constructive feedback. And I didn't have the sense that I could improve. I think what I learned from school was that there are things I was really good at, just like all the academic things, and there's things that I was really bad at and could never be good at, which is all the artistic, manual, and physical things. And
Yep.
and so that would lead to this like, oh, I don't need feedback. I've already been told what I'm good at, what I'm not good at.
Yeah. 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 Right. Exactly that. I've heard Austin, my partner, who talks about them as art scars. He read a book about that, and how many of us hold art scars that we got told at some point, the way you drew that line, your picture of the tree, that's not art. And so then the wounding happens, and there's no place to be like, that's curious. You made this. It doesn't mean I can't grow or improve in how I draw a tree. It just means that maybe the way I'm drawing a tree right now, one, that could be art in itself. And two, there might be places that I can learn. Okay, you can actually learn. You can practice making your lines smoother. You can practice that over time. It's a skill you build. You can practice observing this leaf. You can practice, and then you grow in that practice. That's constructive feed forward, right? I can't change the drawing I made, but Austin says it's like when we have these art scars, they just block the potential to practice, to try, to experiment, to explore, and so then so many potentially amazing, well, then we're just taking arts, right? We could take anything and explore that, and see. You don't all have to be a professional basketball player or something. I could still enjoy playing basketball. I could still, be a part of a pickup game or intramural or something, if that was the thing. Or I could still do math, right? We could just talk about another way, but we don't have, without this feed forward, we just sacrifice potential constantly, right? And I think you name it really well, and what happens. Yeah. The story gets solidified.
Yeah.
And the learning stops.
Yeah. And we develop this self-concept of like, it's like the whole fixed mindset, growth mindset thing. We develop this like, all right, these are the things that I'm good at. And I see it with my daughter, who is going to this amazing kind of alternative style school, which is really not the experience I had. And she's just like always singing like some kind of like nonsense language to herself. She's 6. And then she's just like, she's drawing things. She's like, I'm an artist. She's just like, I'm an artist. She's just like walking around being like, I'm an artist.
Inshallah, may it always be so. I love it.
So amazing. All right. Thank you so much. And I want to do another episode about specifically focusing on that last bit about why is it so hard?
Yeah. Why is it so hard to give it? Why is it so hard to receive it? Why is it so hard to ask for it?
Yeah.
And I think particularly for younger generations, even for older generations, everyone, honestly, there's not so much practice space of also asking for it. Can I get some feedback? How did that go? What did you appreciate? Like, what really worked for you? Let me hear that. What didn't really work for you? Let me hear some of that, and learn from there. Maybe there's a tweak I could make. Maybe there's a better way for me to communicate that. Maybe there's more I need to share there. I just want to have more culture of that openness, because I think it will resolve not everything, but so many things.
Perfect. Thank you, Shilpa.
Thank you, Akur.
And this is the part where I could have, just let well enough alone, but I want to share. I want to reveal to you what was really going on with me. So this is what I said after the recording. So, when you say that last bit, I feel fear. I feel afraid of asking that question. I mean, I could ask it to, there's a few people I could ask it to, but in general, I think there's this whole, ego construct I have that could be, it's very vulnerable to the answer to that question.
Well, that's where the inner critic piece comes in, right? Around perfection, around what do mistakes mean? Am I still a good human being if I didn't do something 100% perfect that everyone loved immediately? And it's a pressure cooker that gives us is so, again, blocks all the experimentation, creativity, also ability to just laugh at ourselves, hold ourselves lightly, be messy sometimes, and it's okay, right? And I think that sort of pressure for perfectionism is also contributing to this cancel culture thing for leaders, this is so complex what we're doing in the world, It's going to be fucking messy sometimes. It's not going to be perfect. And if I can get feedback that is really invested in me, not to tear me down, not to be confused with attack other.
So that's it for this episode. And I am curious if you had the same reaction I did when she brought up that thing about why is it so hard to ask for feedback and get the criticism and be able to differentiate between this constructive, I'm building you up, and the I'm going to hold you down kind of criticism. And of course, all the inner critic work. So would love to hear from you. Thanks, everybody. Thus concludes another episode of the 10,000 Heroes Show. On behalf of myself and Martine, my producer, thank you for listening. And if you never want to miss another episode, if you want to have transcripts of everything you've heard, if you want to be in delightful one-on-one communication with me, and you want to hear about upcoming live events, sign up for our newsletter. You can go to momentumlive.com/podcast and get all the information.